Hello and welcome back to the Education Leadership Podcast. For this chapter, we're going to be talking about the situational approach to leadership. And I got to tell you, we got a packed pod for today. I'm going to start out with an overview of what is situational leadership. And I have not one, but two guest interviews. So stay tuned for that. And you don't want to miss a thing because at the very end of this, we're going to go over those two case studies. And that is some hot, juicy gossip on those leadership styles. So I'm happy to have you back. Welcome back. I'm your host, Molly Cashion. So what is the situational approach? What is situational leadership? Well, I am so glad that you asked. So what it boils down to is this, that different situations demand different kinds of leadership. And this actually reminds me of something that Betsy said during chapter 1 of this podcast. I'm just going to go ahead and let her say that in her own words, because who better to tell you than the lady herself? Am I right?
It seems like something that I would probably do, unless it was a staff member that maybe I was having trouble with and needed a bit more direction.
Right. And so that exactly right there, that idea is a situational leadership. So as you can see, this is a pretty intuitive leadership style, and it basically revolves around classifying followers into different styles. I don't totally agree with this language, but I'll get over it. So basically, your leadership approach should be prescriptive based on how you diagnose your direct reports. And I'm using that language specifically because that is something that you see over and over again. This idea that you can diagnose your followers and prescribe a leadership style. So the way you diagnose your followers is basically, are they competent and are they committed? And how so and how much? So basically, and that changes, over time. So if you can start off at low commitment, low competence, and you can move throughout these processes, either as your job changes, as you take on new responsibilities, as something happens in your personal life, maybe your motivation decreases. It's really different for everybody. And one of the things I really like about this approach is that it really hinges on building relationships, which is something that I am all about. I love building relationships with people. So let's talk a little bit about this leadership aspect of the situational approach. Basically, the prescription has to do with how supportive you are being of your direct reports and how directive you're being. So how you're describing or how you're giving them pointed direction, right? So this is a great graph from Shonhiwa, 2016. And you see this type of graph a lot in the situational approach to leadership. But basically it breaks it down into these 4 quadrants. And I hate on this graph a little bit later with Erica, but this line going through the middle, it's not over time that you, nothing falls into place, right? Because it is absolutely based on your direct reports, how you're doing this. And so if you have something that's where you're being very supportive, but not very directive, you're being more on the supporting end of things, and you can kind of see how that might play out. So I have a special guest right after this, and it is my direct report, Allison Wolf. She's a program coordinator with the Teachers Academy. And I kind of introduced her to these leadership styles. And then we had a little discussion on our leadership styles. And you'll find that I'm in the delegating category. Okay, so right now with me, I have my colleague, Allison Wolf. Hi. Allison is the program coordinator for the Teachers Academy. You've been here for what, 2 months now?
Yeah, just about.
So I just told her what situational leadership is, and we had a chance to discuss our leadership styles and how they kind of work together in the team. And I think we found that I'm really, it's not the anarchy one, it's the delegating one.
Yeah.
Delegating one, and you're more the supporting one. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you see your leadership style playing out in the Teachers Academy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because we talked a little bit about how I'm a former teacher. I just got off a 7-year teaching career, and the delegating, is that what we call it? Yeah, the delegating leadership style then the little blurb, it said it's for low motivation but high skill individuals, or like that's what it works best for.
The supporting one.
Supporting. And that's what I'm used to working with, is individuals with high skill but low motivation. Like students are that. They have this intelligence, they have this ability, but they're just not necessarily motivated to do the thing. So it makes a lot of sense that that's more my leadership style, because that's what I'm used to working with. It's just very low motivation individuals.
Yeah, and she was so observant, and she was like, I feel like you're used to working with people with high motivation and high skill, which is why delegating works really well. I told her my leadership style is collaborative anarchy, which I think is apt.
It is.
But it's nice because I mean, even though like I am technically your supervisor, I can see your leadership style coming in a lot with the supporting nature, because while I'm not necessarily low motivation, sometimes I see this moment where like I'm not sure what to do next, but you know that I have like high capabilities.
I think you're very big picture. Like you can see all of the moving parts and all of the things working. But then when it comes down to zooming in and accomplishing specific tasks, that's where I think like the challenge is. And that's like, I feel like our leadership skills actually work well together, because that's where my strength is to break it down into incremental tasks and then be like, Molly, get this done.
Absolutely.
Molly, get this done. I mean, like even today, like I was like, you were like, okay, I need to do this, this, and this. And I was like, break those down into 3 separate tasks.
I literally
made 3 tasks.
I made one bullet point and it was like, record, edit, post. And she's like, no, those are 3 things. like pull it back.
Yeah.
Pull it back.
Yeah. And so like, I'm much more like step driven and like goal, like big picture goal oriented. Yes. But like, what are the steps that we're going to need to do in order to accomplish the big picture, and how can we like break down those tasks? Scaffolding. That's what you call it in education, is scaffolding.
Scaffolding.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's nice too, because like you said, it does work really well together. I think it would be a lot more challenging if we had like completely opposite leadership styles, but I think that it works really well. I will say, I think that there was an element when you first came on board where I felt like maybe I was in the more coaching category, because there were certain elements that you didn't know how to do, but it was like you were very highly motivated always. But the like competence, I guess, has grown a lot. And but sometimes it was really just directing, because I didn't know, like all that stuff with Workday. I was like, I don't know.
You're like, I don't know, I need this thing done.
I have no idea. Here's a person, here's a resource, but like, I didn't know. So I think that's
no, and I think like I did need that. I think like the stuff with Workday, like you didn't know how to do that either, but I needed it from the people who did know how to do that. Like I set up a meeting with Anne and was just like, help. I needed to process a stipend, and I filled it all out, and then I literally set up a meeting and was like, did I do the thing? And she was like, yeah, like it's done. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. So like, but I needed that kind of like more coaching more than anything else. I needed specific. Yeah, I needed like steps and direction and very clear. And even not even necessarily coaching. What's the one in the bottom corner?
Not delegate, directing.
Yeah. Directing. I needed that. Like I needed specific, like, and because I've said, I think since I've gotten here, like I need to be shown once. Once you show me once, it's true. I'm done and I'm good. I'm good to go. Totally true. But like I need to be shown how to do it one time, because I need to make sure I'm doing it correctly. And then I think that's where like directing really comes in handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today, Allison.
Happy to
I know our listeners really appreciate your perspective. A huge thanks to Allison for being on the podcast today, and also generally just being willing to put up with my antics. And this is not the first time that I have discussed things that I have learned in school with her or with other members of the team. And it was really interesting to me, even just reflecting on this, is, yes, there's leadership, there's elements of situational leadership in our work. I think it's a very like intuitive kind of leadership style, especially because both of us are very interested in building relationships with people. But one of the things that I'm sure you noticed is that situational leadership has leaders and followers, right? This, like many of the other chapters that we've covered so far, are very leader focused. So we have leaders and followers, employees, subordinates, whatever. But even in my interview with Allison, you can see there are these times when, like, yes, maybe I'm the leader in this category, but Allison is a leader for me as well. So I think maybe that speaks a little bit to my collaborative anarchy approach. But I think it is interesting to see. And so hopefully you get an idea that not only how you can see situational leadership in my own context, but it kind of gives you a glimpse into my leadership style just in general. So up next, I have another special guest for you. Surprise, it's Erica Waker. Erica and Molly. So Erica, thank you so much for being here with me today. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and explaining why this graph does not make sense.
You're so welcome.
So the whole idea with situational leadership is that it changes. And so when I was like, well, where do you sit on this graph? That makes no sense because it depends, right? The whole point of situational leadership is it depends. But what I would like for you to do actually is taking a look at this situational leadership graph, thinking about the people that you've engaged with your intervention, some of these teachers. I'm curious, how would you describe their approach in the classroom? And some of the challenging aspects of working with leaders that kind of choose a specific area to kind of fall back on when you're working with them in your workshops.
I definitely think the teachers I interacted with after they had done the culturally relevant curriculum training that they went through, they seemed very much supportive to their students and wanting to like understand where their students were coming from, meeting their students where they're at. So if anything, I might put them in either the supporting or the coaching role, because both of those are the ones where there's more support. It's hard to, I think some are more coaching in that they're high in support and they're high in direction and directive behaviors. But some faculty, I think that I worked with and that I learned from were much more kind of like, let the students show me where we're going, and a little more like fluid, more supportive, less directive. So yeah, those two, I would say for sure.
That's great. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you. I have one more, but I feel like I'm not going to have time, but I'll just ask it anyways.
Sure.
So my last question for you, Erica, is, can you think of a time with a particular student or even a faculty that you were mentoring where you yourself went through a couple of these different elements of situational leadership, but with one person?
Yes. I have had students that I mentor in, so the same student will be in psych club, and a student of mine, like an actual student of mine, and maybe they're doing a research project that's extracurricular that they're just doing to present that research at a conference. And I will 100% go from more coaching, which again, I think high directive, high supportive. I hope that's how I am in the classroom. I think sometimes I maybe lean more toward high supportive. And then all of a sudden, if it's just in Psych Club, I'm complete support, and I let them direct the conversation. I let them direct the way that we're leaning, what we're going to do, what service we're going to do, what events we're going to do. And then maybe if it's to all of a sudden we're on a research project and they don't know how to do an IRB, for instance, it's full directing. Like I'm have them share their screen and I'm like, you click this and then you do this and then you do that. And this is what you have to do by Tuesday of next week. And so I will definitely do that with students when we're changing roles, and like if I'm their teacher or if I'm their mentor.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm sure our listeners do too. Well, another huge thanks to Erica Waker for coming on the pod. So that little joke about the graph not making sense, basically, it has this line that goes through it. Like, this is going to be the direction. At the end of the day, that's not really how it works. And that's not even really how it's meant to work. And these case studies that I'm about to present are really fascinating because of that element of where do they fall in this graph? And like, how would we describe their leadership styles? And also there's no ethic really, as we've seen in a lot of these other leadership approaches, there's no ethic that's prescribed to this leadership style. So is it good? Is it bad? But these case studies, like I'm telling you, there's like a clear good way and bad way in one of them. So let's go ahead and get started. So Todd, let's talk about these case studies that we've got from Northouse and Lee. Our first one, which is the K12 case study. And this is a tale of two teams, okay? So we've got a principal, Jorge Hernandez, and he is feeling some pressure because the test scores are not that good. So he wants a very hands-off approach, right? Very hands-off leader. And so he assigns two of the department chairs, Tamika Jones with the English department and Lewis Milton with the math department, to kind of rally the team and get these test scores up. And they take two totally different approaches to this. So Tamika crushes. She has meetings 2 times a month. She provides the teacher with the initial data and then lets the teachers work with the data and then come up with solutions on their own. And then they make the curriculum changes to better increase these test scores. Throughout this process, she's very helpful for her team. But throughout the process, they realized that, you know, their students would really benefit from a language arts lab. So Tamika gets the resources together and she makes it happen for them. Lewis, on the other hand, now we don't know where he's falling on this continuum, but it seems like he has extremely low motivation because basically, but maybe high competence, you know, so he basically takes this initial data, and he writes a report. He has one meeting with his team where he just gives them the report and is like, please go implement this. Okay. Halfway through, he has another meeting, but basically, according to the meeting minutes of other teacher meetings, no one is satisfied with Lewis's approach. That's true. That's not true. I'm being a little bit dramatic. A lot of people are complaining that he's not there to support them. But there's other people that say that they actually really like the autonomy that he's given them to implement his report. Two totally different approaches here, right? So test results come back after a year, and no surprise, the English, the language arts section increased by a lot. Math scores stayed the same. So Jorge has to meet with both of these people and determine what is an action plan for the next school year. So I'm going to address 2 of the questions that Northouse and Lee have sent into the podcast. So he talked a little bit about development levels. What development levels are Lewis and Tamika? And this is an interesting question because we don't talk about development levels at all in this chapter. But this is specific to where the followers are. So remember, I was like, yeah, so Lewis, he might have low motivation, but we're not sure where he is on the competence score. But Tamika, very high competence, very high motivation. So that's kind of where I would put both of them on where, as far as where they are as followers. And then they're also leaders in their own right. Okay. So you can see that Tamika has taken on more of a coaching role, right? So she's very directive, but at the same time, she gives her team a lot of room to play with it, but she's there when they need them. You know, Lewis, on the other hand, when I first read this, I was like, wow, great. Like Tamika's using the situational approach and Lewis is failing. But what I really think is happening is that he is misusing. I think they're trying to say that he's misusing the situational approach. And instead of, you know, providing coaching to the people that needs it, he's going full delegation mode. He like is assuming that people are just going to take it on themselves and it's going to happen for them. So I would say that he's not using it very well, right? What leadership style should Jorge use in his upcoming meetings? You know, in situational approach, he should take different styles, right? Because they are 2 different people and they have 2 different approaches. So Jorge's got to use these, he's got to use that situational leadership. You know, Tamika needs a totally different level of support than Lewis does in totally different direction. So, you know, Jorge, you got a problem on your hands here too, because if you want them to work together, you know, how do you highlight like Tamika's success? I was going to say without making Lewis feel bad, but like, do we really care if Lewis feels bad? I don't know. So our second case study in higher education has to do with, it's called integration hesitation. So Jackie Weller, she has now been hired as the director of enrollment management. And so she sees that students are really struggling because in enrollment, you have these 2 big like hurdles to get over. You have the admissions and you have financial aid. And so she's like, let's merge the two departments. Great. But she has two different department heads, two different technologies, two different staff, like everything is separate, right? The admissions guy, Corey, totally on board, super excited about this. I would say that his development is that he is high motivation and it seems like high competence, but there's not really a lot of evidence in the case study for me to say that completely. But then we have Jenna, and Jenna is the director of the financial aid office, and she is hesitant, extremely hesitant to have these. I would even say not hesitant. She is not on board. She does not want to integrate with the admissions department. And the main thing she keeps coming back to is she is concerned for the students' confidentiality. Like there are confidential information in the financial aid documents that she does not want to expose to the admissions department. So Jackie is still like, okay, we're going to push on. So she has this whole game plan. Okay. She sends Corey and Jenna to a conference on enrollment. So not admissions, not financially, but enrollment. So they can kind of get to know her perspective. Then she sends them to conferences about the other one. So she sends Jenna, the financial aid person, to an admissions conference. She sends Corey, the admissions guy, to a financial aid conference, right? So they come back and then she has them lead this big brainstorming session between both of the teams, and they're collaborating. It seems pretty good. And, you know, Jackie is like, you know what, I'm going to step back. Like they've got this, I'm just going to watch them shine. The only time that she speaks up during this brainstorming session is to bring up that piece about confidentiality in students. So she's showing Jenna that she's supportive of her, like that's some high support behavior as far as situational leadership goes, right? So at the end of the brainstorming session, there are some people from both teams that are interested in cross-training, right? So that they can be, fluent in both systems and be able to help the students even more. But there are still some people that are kind of hesitant. And at the end of the day, after all of this, and including leading this brainstorming session, Jenna is still not on board. She is still hesitant about, putting students, like having these two departments integrate to help the students. So despite all of this, Jackie, she just says, well, I hope that Jenna will get over it eventually. Actually, what she says is she hopes that as the process continues, they will become more comfortable with the new way of business. And one of the interesting questions here that I wanted to address from Northouse and Lee is, what about flexibility? So flexibility in situational leadership is very key. And I actually think that Jackie did a great job of providing flexibility, because I think, especially because she's trying to get this whole thing on board. And I thought she was doing a pretty good job until I read that Jenna's still not on board. And Jackie doesn't care. Like, we're going to integrate the departments and I'm just going to cross my fingers. So it seemed like it was going really well, but at the end of the day, it looks like Jackie is not flexible. So those are the two case studies. I would love to know your thoughts on these. Like, how should Jorge deal with this meeting? How should he address them? And then also, like, Jackie seemed great. Like, she was bringing up these like points that Jenna had made, but like at the end of the day, she's still going to do what she's going to do, right? So what does that look like to you? And then, also in the comments on the next page, go ahead and put, how does this apply to your leadership context? Like, how do you work with your own like subordinates, your direct reports, but also in your intervention? How can you use this to kind of work with the people that you're trying to work with? Or has this approach been used and potentially badly, the way that Lewis had it done? Like, the way that Lewis was using this approach was just bad, misused. How has this approach potentially used poorly in the past kind of affected the way that you're now having to do your job and your problem of practice? So let me know. And it has been great talking with you today, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast.